You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast produced by Veteran Strategies and featuring conversations with fascinating and impactful men and women who have shaped our world, our communities, and our history. My name is Robert Vane, Principal of Veteran Strategies, and your host for our discussion. You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Garmon Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and NFP, a national insurance broker with strong local content. Our podcast is featured on the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact Chris Spangle or me at leadersandlegends.net. And as always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. McAllister.
Thank you for joining us on the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest today, Chris Bailey. You know him from various roles, but he currently occupies what is, in my view, one of the 5 most important jobs in central Indiana, in the city of Indianapolis, and that he is the Chief of Police for the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department. We'll discuss some of these other jobs that I always rank high. Chief Bailey, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
This will get posted before the end of the year, probably close to either end of November, 1st of December. So let's not bury the lead. We are literally the day after the Eras Tour has completed here, 3 nights in Lucas Oil Stadium. To me, it's one of IMPD's finest hours. You had some terrific posts on social media about it. What's it like hosting Ms. Swift and the Swifties?
It was a fantastic weekend. I've told several people this, that Friday I started my day at about 7:30 in the morning, and I think I got home around 11:30, maybe a little bit before that. But it was one of the best days of my career, just because of all of my interactions from the cops early in the morning, roll calls and visiting and talking about what we were getting ready to jump into, and their excitement, those friendship bracelets, and then just the interactions I had with people throughout that entire day. Very positive, lots of good energy. They weren't talking about politics. They weren't talking about crime. They were just here having a great time, and it was fantastic.
Let me ask you about something else related to the Taylor Swift. Did you get to meet her?
No, I did not. No.
Did your kids get to go?
My daughter did attend Saturday night, yes.
She's still singing?
It's amazing how many people know every single word to every single song. It's amazing. I was in there for a brief period of time, and then I thought my ears were going to start bleeding. So it was so loud and it wasn't from the singing, it was from the screaming.
Like the Beatles.
So, yes, it's something I've never ever experienced or seen before. We sold more merchandise here than any other U.S. city, and only second to Australia in the entire tour.
I think that's because people knew this was the end, so this was there.
And we're a great city. It's close to everything. You can get here and get in and out.
My girlfriend was asking me about that. She goes, I wonder why here? And I'm like, it's close to everything. We have the best airport in the country. It made the most sense. Did you work, let's do apples to maybe apples. What was your responsibility during the Super Bowl in 2012?
So I was a lieutenant, and I was in charge of what we called it. We had the downtown broken up into zones. And so I was in charge of the ESPN zone, because ESPN was broadcasting in Pan Am Plaza.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
They had their set there, they had outdoor set. We were set up inside Union Station. And so I was in charge of that particular area. And I'm glad I was in charge of that area, because I saw some of the other responsibilities. Man, I lucked out. I remember the LMFAO concert at the end of Georgia Street by Gamebridge, or whatever it was called before, Conseco.
Banker's Life?
Banker's Life, yeah. And I walked down the steps from right there at Pan Am Plaza to look down, and all I saw was a sea of people all the way down to the field house. Just no room. I'm going back inside Union Station here. This is back to my
When are they going to cut
gig.
to the chase and just name the field house after John Ball? And just call it the John Ball Field House and be done
John,
with it?
I think John would love that.
He's deserving, by the way.
He is. He's a good friend, and he does a great job over there. And I think John would love that. Maybe it's a legacy project we can work on when he's finally done.
You and I can make that happen.
Yeah, we can call people, right? I think Mel would be up for it.
Mel Ray. God, if you don't know John Ball, he is one who was 20 plus years on IMPD, and one of the nicest, best people you'll ever meet.
Yeah, and he works his tail off. That's a tough job.
Yeah, that's not
Every
9 to
event-
5, Monday through Friday.
No, every single event, he's there. And he has done that for, I don't know how long he's been there now, 10 plus years probably. He works hard.
Do you work usually when you're downtown and events like that in uniform?
I do, yes.
And is that just the secret handshake? Like you can go anywhere?
Yeah, pretty much. But
Not in an abusive way,
Yeah,
not like
right.
you're taking advantage of it, but here's the chief of police and he's out and about. And I would assume that not only the rank and file, but people like to see that.
Yeah, that's my sole purpose. It's just PR. Right? I'm not directing traffic. I did a little bit of that during the 500. I think this year or last year. I can't remember. I've lost all those skills. I haven't been the real police for a long time.
That's why you have Jim Dora Jr., my best friend.
Right. It's right. Yeah, he was busy this weekend. No, that's what
both as a hotel owner and a police
That's
officer.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And we go out and just talk to people, talk to the cops, make sure they see me. I go in the venue. We usually have command posts within the venue. Go up and visit with those individuals. Walk around, just be seen. I think that helps people feel safe. That's what we heard all weekend. This weekend was that there's cops everywhere. I wouldn't say they're everywhere. We're such a small, our downtown's so condensed that when we put the number of officers we have down there, it just looks like we're everywhere. And that's got nothing but positive reviews because of that.
May I follow up on that a little
Yeah.
bit? And this happened during the Super Bowl as well. There was criticism of there's the 400 cops downtown.
Yeah.
Why aren't there 400 cops in all these other places?
Yeah.
And that criticism is paired a lot of times with why do we invest in so much downtown? I have this podcast engineer, Chris Spangle, libertarian bent, really wasn't down with all the downtown investment until we had a guy named David Frick on the podcast, who's probably the most important citizen of Indianapolis no one's ever heard of. Deputy mayor, he negotiated. I don't know if
I don't.
David negotiated the deal that brought the Colts here.
Okay.
He helped make sure that Richard Hall lived when he was kidnapped by Kritzis. The list goes on and on. So there's this kind of concentrated angst about downtown, which, of course, I think is madness. How would you react to people who said, why did we have all these police downtown? Why aren't they in X, Y, and Z neighborhood?
One, it's not sustainable, right? If we could put 200 cops in one neighborhood tomorrow, my question is, what neighborhood is that? And then what's the purpose? What is the mission there? Is it just to stop everything that moves and hope you find a bad actor, hope you find a murderer and all that? I think that's an outdated way of policing, number one. I think it alienates more people than it actually serves a purpose to. And like I said, it's not sustainable to do that day after day after day. We had 12 canceled days off this year on our calendar because of the number of events that we had in this year. And that's more manageable, right? And when we have the concentrated people that we have, this weekend, no other neighborhood in the city had this many people in one small area anywhere. It would be, I wouldn't be doing my job. We wouldn't be doing our job in public safety if we weren't putting people where the people are and give them a purpose. They had a specific purpose. It wasn't law enforcement. It was protection. It was how do we prevent bad things from happening in large groups of people like we've seen across our country. That was our purpose. And our cops can't do what they did the last 3 days, day after day after day. There's just not enough of them, and we were making people work their days off. And so we'd have a worn-out police department, and we wouldn't have enough money to sustain that either. That's just, it's not possible. I will tell you this, that a lot of cities in this state are able to function and operate because of what happens in downtown Indianapolis. Day after day, weekend after weekend, month after month. If it weren't for that, some of the things that happen in places like Gary and other places wouldn't be happening, because we generate so much revenue here in this city that it is the economic engine of the state, and we have a responsibility to make sure that we're able to help sustain the entire state of Indiana when it comes to taxes and everything that Indianapolis provides to the state that we don't, frankly, get in return.
And we are a donor county and have been.
We are. There's a lot of conversation now about user fees and all those things about events that come here. And I'm not getting into that discussion necessarily, but I'd say we're also only one major cities that when you work here and you live somewhere else, you take your income tax money somewhere else. But you use our roads, use our services, and all those things that happen. And so when you ask yourself, why does Hamilton County have such nice roads? All the people work in Indianapolis and then take their money back to Hamilton County. Why do they pay their cops and firefighters so much money? They work in Indianapolis and take their money back to Hamilton County. And good for them. I'm not casting stones, but there are a lot of benefits to having these kind of events in Indianapolis. And let me tell you who would be on the hot seat today if something bad would have happened during the Taylor Swift concert because we failed to staff it appropriately. It wouldn't be one of these armchair quarterbacks. It'd be the guy that's talking to you right now. I'd be looking for a new job.
When you have it just the week before Taylor Swift, the greatest event every year that happens in the city, bar none. No event gets anywhere near as close as the Irvington Halloween Festival.
Yes, it keeps growing.
It is. Now, so I grew up in Irvington, went to Hal, fellow IPS kid like you, and we'll get to that.
Yeah.
It's so different than the way it used to be in the 70s, right? How much are these big events? How much are they not only taxing from like an activity and exertion, but also how much do the individual officers enjoy working them, in the sense that every time we have one of these big events, it just reinforces the reputation that Indianapolis is the place to have big events?
Yeah. Whether they're admitted or not, I think that they enjoy it. I always enjoyed working those events when I was on our event response group, which is our crowd control group. You usually see them riding around now on gators, which we didn't have a whole lot of when I was on that. But they have a great time, especially with crowds like we just saw. But we are getting more and more attention. We are getting more and more events. And it's the events outside of downtown Indianapolis that are saying, wait, we're required to fund all this ourselves when some of these other events get all these other benefits. And so it's becoming more and more of a problem for us that we're working with. We're having discussions, the fire department, emergency management agency, our friends at DPW. Don't forget about them.
Yeah.
They've been engaged every single weekend. Those women and men are incredible people.
Taylor Schaefer at Downtown Indy.
Since March, every weekend, some form or fashion, we've been deployed with DPW and fire departments. We're all talking together about, we're going to have some discussions about what the future looks like. We love the events. We love that they're coming here. We love our city, and we're going to do our part to make sure they're safe. But we're going to have to look at some of the ordinances, I believe, and reevaluate them to see what makes sense in the future, specific to civic-sponsored events. And then what promises are being made from Indiana Sports Corp, from Visit Indy, from Downtown Indy to these events, or the CIB. What were we saying to these events, and how can we be more involved in the front end of those so that we're prepared to deal with what's coming? Because the next few years it's not getting any slower here.
And it can't, and the city and the state can't afford, literally, for it to get any slower.
We will lose out to other cities. Cincinnati's trying to redo some things there, and I hear, and other places are trying to steal this business. I think Jim Morris,
certainly
responsible for Indiana Sports Corp, I think is what my understanding is, and maybe the only one that existed at the time, and now there's hundreds of these same kind of Sports Corp, Sports Corp, hundreds of these things across the country now that are all trying to do what Indianapolis is doing. Look at what's happening. Nashville's building a new stadium there that I think it's going to have a retractable roof. That it's going to be, that's the Vegas of the Midwest, right? So there's a lot of competition out there, and we have to stay ahead of it.
You are listening to the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest today is Chief of the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department, Chris Bailey. Chris grew up on the west side. Now, most of the folks I know who are police officers have wanted to be a police officer since they were a kid. Is that your case as well? Did you have a family member, a dad, an uncle who served and you're like, that's what I want to do?
No family members, and it is the only thing that I can recall in my life, other than parts of thinking about being an attorney. But the only thing that I've wanted to do since I was 12, 13 years old was be a police officer. And I really don't know why. People often say that this is a calling, and for me, I truly believe that it was. And I worked at Indy Parks as a lifeguard starting when I was 15 years old.
Which pool?
Rhodius Park. Over on the neighborhood actually is called West Indy. It's just on the other side of the river here. It's close to downtown. My middle school, actually, if you're going down Kentucky Avenue toward Eli Lilly, is on the right hand side, just on the other side of the river there. Thomas Edison School 47. So I rode my bike downtown. Me and my cousins rode our bikes down to go to Union Station when Union Station was the thing, before Circle Center Mall. So I remember interacting with park rangers and IPD officers that came into the park all the time. And so I started friendships up with two beat officers in that beat on the South District, Don Spiegel and Greg Weber. Mm-hmm. And at 18 years old, I started doing ride-alongs with them, both of them, in my own neighborhood, which was different. I'd pop out of the car and I know these people. I went to school with them. And I actually patrol over in that neighborhood for a short period of time when I came on. But that's where that grew is with those two mentors of mine. Both of them are retired now. Great guys, great cops. Worked over there for as long as I can remember, even after I came on. And then Mike Spears was a lieutenant.
Yep.
Future police chief, former police chief, however you want to look at it. I was a lifeguard. There was a kid that was drowning in Old Eagle Creek when I was riding with somebody that day, and both of us jumped in the water to try to save this kid and his mom. I think they both ended up passing away, but that's when I was just a 18, 19-year-old kid. This is all I've wanted to do.
The police department has to have somebody not named McAtee, one person.
I think that at this moment, there is no one on the IMPD side
really
in the family.
That has to be
maybe on the sheriff's side, but right now I don't know that there's anyone.
That has to be ending a streak back to the 60s or late 50s.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah.
You went to George Washington High School, graduated in 1994.
Uh-huh.
Washington closed how long after that?
95 was the last year, and then it was closed for a few years and then opened back up, I think, as a middle school.
Yeah.
And then a community where they had multiple grades, and now it's back to being a high school.
And I graduated from Howe in Irvington on the east side in 86. We were fortunate. We went to IPS. This is no denigration to its current status, but I never felt like I had a subpar education just because I went to 4 Indianapolis public schools. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I feel like I got a great foundation at IPS, School 46, Daniel Webster. I walked every day to school from kindergarten to 6th grade. It was only 2 blocks away. I went to school with the same kids, unless someone moved away. All those years into middle school, into high school. My family went to George Washington High School. I never felt like I was shortchanged at all. I was a swimmer. I was always a little too slow to play football at George Washington High School.
Sure.
And a little too short to play basketball at George Washington High School. But I was a swimmer and I played tennis, and so I had a great experience in that. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Have you met any of the other famous Washington High School grads?
I have met a few over the years. Some of them I don't recognize, but they recognize me. There's a strong alumni association with George Washington High School.
That's why I asked, yes.
I was having lunch not too long, I guess it's been over a year, I shouldn't say not too long ago, at Shapiro's. And the guy that writes the newspaper, there's a newspaper I didn't know about, wanted to interview me about my time there. So my dad was there, I think, when McGinnis and Keller and all those folks played.
Steve
Downing. Downing played basketball over there. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about whether you want to call it the inner city, the urban core, the old city wards, since we're in election season, are they, I'm not going to ask the question, are they redeemable? Because that's an unfair question. Are they falsely emphasized when it comes to crime in Indianapolis? The reason I ask the question is this. Ask an East Sider, and they will complain all the time about every crime that takes place 1 centimeter east of Meridian is a shooting on the east side, a robbery on the east side. How do you get away from that sort of perception that it's just the urban core that's causing all these problems?
One, it's just false. There's issues in every neighborhood in our county, some form or fashion. Now it's a scale, right? If you live in Meridian Kessler, someone taking your patio furniture off your front porch is a big deal, but that's a crime. And violent crime it used to be much more concentrated, I believe, and is now a little spread out because crime is mobile. People are mobile. Drug dealing is mobile. A lot of time, back when I was an initial cop, and you have experience working in law enforcement too and being around it, there were corners you went to buy crack cocaine or whatever it was, or little neighborhoods, or even that. Now it's mobile, right? It's message-based. Meet me at any gas station anywhere in the county. At some point in that day, there's been a drug transaction on that gas station.
Online, which we
it's
obviously
online,
didn't have to worry
dark
about.
web stuff. A lot of stuff comes in the mail, package delivered, all those things. So there isn't. It's changed, right? And when you see some of the concentration, especially on the east side, where our east district is our most violent district, but those neighborhoods they weren't always that way, right? Look what we've done. What they used to call Dodge City. Do you remember that? Fall Creek Place.
Fall Creek Place.
Right? That was or some of our other public housing complexes that we've torn down or whatever.
Zunieville? You ever spend any time in Zunieville?
Brick City. Those
Graveyard?
Are all, yes.
These are east side.
And southeast side. Some of them were on the beat that I worked with. These individuals were there, and we didn't solve the problem. We just pushed them out. And we concentrated a lot of people who can't afford to buy a $300,000, what would have been a $200,000 house in Fall Creek Place 15 years ago. They can't afford to live there. And as warehouses go down, as manufacturing closes and all that, we've pushed people into certain neighborhoods. But they're just like most people that live in these neighborhoods are good people. They want the same thing we all do. They want to be able to have their kids play in their front yard. They're good people, and they're taken advantage of by a small group of individuals that have no connection to the neighborhood. They're not concerned about raising a family and being productive citizens, and then they get lumped into my zip code's all terrible. That's just false. That's just false. And then that hurts them because then businesses don't locate there. Grocery stores aren't there. All the things that people need to raise and family and survive aren't there. Schools close and their kids are being bused all the way across the city, and that's just not fair. It's not a fair statement.
Let's take a neighborhood I didn't live in, but spent plenty of time there, and that's Brookside Park.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's still known as the Swamp,
but
it was known as the Swamp forever and ever, not just among police officers, but by my friends. That's what they would just call it.
Yeah, I still hear that.
But it is changing as a result of the mass things extending from Mass Ave. How much does that sort of change in a neighborhood? And people criticize it as gentrification. But are there some law enforcement benefits when people say, I'm going to invest in these homes, they're torn down, yeah, I'm going to make some money, but this neighborhood can come back? Because Brookside Park, if you ride your bike through there and some of the side streets and main streets, it's beautiful.
Obviously, a vacant lot or a burned down house or an abandoned house probably isn't contributing much to the tax rolls. And when those come back in, then the schools, IPS, whatever neighborhood they're in, those benefit from having those homes back on the tax rolls. I always worry about, when it comes to gentrification specifically, some of the older people that live in those neighborhoods that have lived there forever, that have ridden the wave of the RCA plant being at Sherman and Michigan. Mm-hmm. And raised their families there. They're still there. And then there's $400,000 houses popping up next to them, and then their home prices increase, and then they're living on a fixed income and their property taxes go up just because of the system that we find ourselves in. I worry about those individuals, but I'm always for taking, if you can, take a vacant lot or an abandoned house and put a family in it and put that back in the tax rolls, but also giving someone else to live the American dream. And the more people that are able to do those things, I think it helps our police department. It reduces crime. It makes a neighborhood more steady and stable. And when you have a neighborhood that's steady and stable, then they're engaged with the police department. They're calling the police when they see something that doesn't look right. They're doing all those things that we encourage people to do because they care and have a stake in what happens in that community.
You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Garmon Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, and the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn. Our guest is Chris Bailey. He is the chief of the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department. Chief Bailey, is there a particular Hoosier leader or legend you admire most?
Ooh, I think that is the one that I've watched their career progress and think to myself, man, I wish I could have, because I have a big interest in politics. I keep to myself about it. I don't participate in any events, but I've always thought that'd be something that I would like to do. But it's Richard Lugar, and seeing this guy, school board member, mayor, really changed the way government is. And I know he had a lot of help in Indianapolis and Marion County, and then becoming a United States Senator and really become a statesman, right? That I think in the environment we find ourselves politically right now, we would long for a statesman like Richard Lugar to still be in the mix.
What's a typical day for you? You get up, I can only imagine what your calendar looks like, not only your internal duties, but also the external pressures, the request to speak. How do you balance? And do you ever just say, look, I'm going to get in my car and I'm going to be out in my old neighborhood on the west side on a Saturday night? How do you make that? How do you make those choices?
Yeah, I used to do a lot more of that, jump in the car and drive around thing when I was a commander on North District, although that wasn't my neighborhood. I really enjoyed riding through the neighborhoods and taking radio runs with the cops and driving through Crown Hill Cemetery or sitting at the highest point in Indianapolis there and looking over the city and reflecting and just being out. And then assistant chief, I did that a little more. They don't like me out rolling around right now by myself. They know that there's still this police officer inside me that's dying to get out. And so they discourage me from being out there as much, by myself at least. But I still do it. I just roll through
by yourself. They think you're going to get hurt. Because I imagine you get a lot of, you are the chief, but police aren't exactly known for their sensitivity.
No, I think that what they're worried about is that I'll get into something that then they have to explain, right? And you and I are talking. We know who they are, right?
Yes, sir.
You've been dealing with them for the last couple of weeks. I love it. I absolutely love it. My biggest emphasis now, and I missed out quite a bit at the beginning part of this tenure as chief, which is not quite a year old yet. My daughter's highly engaged in volleyball and travel.
Oh my God.
Volleyball, which starts tonight with practice, but we'll start traveling in January. And I missed a lot of tournaments earlier this year just because I wanted to be here and be all engaged. I don't plan on doing that in 2025. I plan on being as many of those as I can because I have to have that balance. It's what keeps me steady here. My phone goes off all night long. I get notified of every single major incident in our city, and I'm not complaining. I love my job. I get to be the chief of the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department, something that when I started in the academy, I wanted to achieve, and I was able to achieve that goal. And didn't know if it was always going to be possible, but I kept working, stayed resilient, and here I am. But it's a busy schedule. People always want your time. And
do they expect miracles? Having worked for Mayor Ballard, now that the mayor doesn't have juice, obviously he has a ton. If he wants a pothole filled, it gets filled tomorrow. There's a lot of people looking to government, please help, please solve my problem,
Right.
or please do X, not just for them, but for the neighborhood or the city or whatever. Is it difficult to be able to tell people no? And how much satisfaction do you get as a native of this city when you can solve someone's problems?
Yeah, it is tough because there's so many different constituencies. There's so many people that want something different. And you have to find that sweet spot about what you can do. I'm focused on just doing the right thing for the right reasons in the right way at the right time. And if I can answer those questions yes, then I feel like I've made the right decision. And sometimes everyone's mad at you. And that's when I know for sure that I've made the right decision, when everyone's mad at you. But it does give you a great sense of satisfaction when someone calls you and you can get that issue taken care of. There was an unfortunate incident. Someone was injured in an officer-involved shooting. The mom wanted to see her son, who was a suspect. That the right thing to do is to make sure that she can see her son in the hospital, even though he's in custody. And so we made that happen. That gives me a sense of satisfaction. Now, those individuals the family may not like what happened in the circumstances, but doing the right thing and making sure she's able to see her son in the hospital, even though he's in our custody, is the right thing to do. And it's just little things. Every day there's someone who wants something, right? And most of them are things that I can help them with, and that does make me feel good about the job I have.
Is it daunting to go in front of a group that or you think is going to be, if not personally hostile towards you, but in terms of the demographic and the history, that they are predisposed to be hostile towards police or the police department? Is that difficult as someone who has to go to those meetings, not because you're commanded to, but because they deserve your presence?
Right. It can be a little bit disheartening, especially when there are individuals that call you or your cops killers or murderers or whatever else, the things that are said. But yeah, I try not to, and the older I've gotten, the more wiser I've gotten. I still have a long way to go. I try not to take that personally. They're coming from a place that I may not understand, that I may not have been in that situation. My family history doesn't relate the same way. I've not had the same experiences with law enforcement. And so I try to not take it personal, but it does get disheartening in times, and I really feel bad for the frontline cops. I'm now used to it, and I can handle it. I went through 2020 as the assistant chief in 2021, and all those meetings and all those discussions about things we didn't even do. Like, we weren't in Minneapolis, right? But we get swept up in that same broom stroke as everyone else. But so for me, I'm more comfortable with it and can take it. I really feel bad for the frontline cops who came into this the same way I did, with a spirit of service, who want to give back and serve something bigger than themselves. And they feel that more than I do. They get discouraged. They hear that, and they do take it personal. Even if it's not here, they see it on the news or see it on Twitter. And I think that's one of the big reasons why we have such a recruiting problem. It's not that this isn't a good job. It's not that the pay isn't. We have a pension, which is almost non-existent in the world. It more comes down to, do they feel the love and support for a tough job that they do every single day? And I think many of them feel that they don't.
Let's go to the flip side of that, just to be candid here. Two things. One, I always thought that growing up on the east side, and then I went in the Army right after high school, so that multicultural doesn't even describe it. How did your upbringing, Indianapolis public schools, the melting pot that is the near west side, just like the near east side, how much has that helped you relate? And then, appending to the question I just asked you, how gratified are you when you have leaders of the Black community, of the African American community, people like Charles Harrison and others, come up and put their arm around you and say, you got a tough job, your folks aren't always going to get it right, but we're here?
Yeah, and that's what I hear most of the time. I want to put that out there. When I'm going on what I previously said, our cops, because that's what plays on TV, radio, and social media, is the negative. A vast majority of our people in our community, all demographics, want and need the police, but they want and need good policing, fair policing, constitutional policing. And that's what we're trying to provide here. And it does make me feel good when I hear it. And I hear it from African-American leaders all across the county about how tough the job is. They support us, and they want accountability. They want accountability for the police, but they also want accountability for the community. We can have both and still support the police and still support the community. Those things are not counter to each other. And I think growing up, I did have an advantage that some people in our community don't, even my own kids. Right? They're Franklin Township schools. There's some diversity there, not as much as diversity as maybe I went to school with, that exposure. But even in my own neighborhood, I didn't know it at the time, but as I grew older, there was still a division. Belmont Street. If you were African American and lived in West Indianapolis, you lived on the west side of Belmont Street. That's where a majority. And then if you were white, you lived on the east side of Belmont Street. But I didn't notice those things as a kid. It wasn't something that was talked about in my house, but it exists and it existed then. And so while I may have had more exposure than some, there's still a lot of exposure and understanding that I didn't have about the struggles of our neighbors in African American community specifically, that I just had no idea about and still don't.
You mentioned a few minutes ago in our interview, you were talking about some of the gigs you had before you became chief. Mm-hmm. One of them was you were the public information officer.
Yes.
I think I was gone from the mayor's office when you, maybe at the tail end. I left in November of 10.
Yeah, so just right before, because I wasn't promoted to lieutenant until 2011, so it was just before.
How did that help you prepare yourself, not only for the job of chief of police, but the public relations, the communications duties that are just inherent in the job and the patience, quite frankly, that you need to have when dealing with the news media, especially on tactical problems like a shooting as opposed to strategic public safety issues?
I wouldn't trade it for the world. It prepared me for every single step I've had since then. And not just official positions, but participating in our own internal promotion process. I know there's a lieutenant in there, which I'd already participated in 2 processes to get to that point. But the next one was captain, the merit rank of captain, which they can't take away from you,
right?
Unless you really mess up. I finished first in that process, solely, in my opinion, because of the preparation, the ability to talk, think on my feet, understand lots of different issues. When you're in that public information officer position, you have access to everything. The good things that are happening in your department, the bad things that are happening in the department. You have to help the chief or the agency deal with the crisis. You have to work with the mayor's office. You have to understand the political nature of all those things. You have all those experiences that help you in every single job beyond that. And people that come in there now say the same thing. They're better communicators. They do better in promotion processes. They understand the agency better. They have a better understanding of all the complexities that exist within policing. And so if I had to pick one specific job of my entire career that made the difference to help me in this seat today, it's that experience as a public information officer.
So basically, you wouldn't have stars on your collar if it wasn't for the mentorship of Rita Reith.
Absolutely. And you know what? She'll tell you she's responsible for it. Actually, in my phone, I hope she listens to this, I don't list her as Rita. It's actually Princess. That's what's in there, right? That's
really,
you know,
she was queen when I was in the mayor's office. Has she been demoted?
I mean, you have your own experience there. She was very quick to call me when I talked about anything that wasn't my purview to talk about. It's IFD. I love her to death. She's great at her job, and I learned a ton from her and still do.
We do love her. She's an incredible public servant and a sweetheart and a wonderful mother.
Her daughters are living their best life down there.
Absolutely.
South of us.
You mentioned also mentorship. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how many living chiefs of police there are. 4 or 5, I would guess. If you count Joe McAtee Sr., Joseph Glenn McAtee.
Yeah, 5 or 6, yes.
I got to know one
We
of
lost
them.
Toller.
You lost Toller, yeah. I know one of them particularly well. I've known him for a long time, and that's Don Christ. He's a wonderful man. Wonderful.
Chief and A is probably the senior of the group.
Do you guys ever get together? Did they reach out and say, hey, look, we know what you're up against. Call us if you need anything?
They have all offered that, and my intention this year was to get all of it together, and then Toller passed away, and I didn't have an opportunity to do that. And frankly, I've neglected putting that together. Thanks to Counselor Renee, we started a project to try to recognize former chiefs and name something in our department after them, and we haven't made it, not all the chiefs, but all the living chiefs. And so we were able to dedicate the Chiefs Conference Room to Chief Toller before he passed away, the Training Academy to Chief N.A., and we have a few more to get through. Barker and Siselski and Spears and Height and Riggs, Roach, they're all still here. And I do talk to some of them often, especially Chief Height. Chief Height, fantastic human being, knows a ton about law enforcement, and he is the best chief I've ever worked for with police community relations. Nobody does it better. No one did it better than him. And he calls me his little brother, calls me all the time. And if I picked the phone right now and needed something from him, he would fly out here if I asked him to. He's Chief Siselski, another great mentor, retired, living his best life, driving around in an RV. Former PIO, Jerry Barker, former PIO, and they're great. Nobody knows about this job until you sit in the seat. It is a very lonely job some days, and that's not a pity party. I'm not throwing a pity party. I asked for it. It is very lonely and can be very lonely, and so having that network. I'm also part of Major City Chiefs Association. There's 77 of us across the U.S. and in Canada, and we have our own groups too. We commiserate together and talk things through.
You've been serving since, checking my notes, 1999. I think that's about the same time I assigned Catherine Cummings her first car.
Uh-huh.
So there's a lot of people who've come through then.
Yeah.
I want to ask you 2 questions, and then we'll get to the 5 questions that we ask all of our guests.
Okay.
The first one is probably the most controversial issue in the early 2000s with regard to law enforcement, public safety, so not crime, public safety, was the merger between Marion County Sheriff's Department and Indianapolis Police Department. What grade would you give that merger 17 years later?
Probably a C. I understand why it happened, and I was from the IPD side. I did not want it, did not like it, was not looking forward to it, but here we are, and I don't think I would want to go back. I would like to see the implementation probably a little bit different than it was. The city, the Sheriff's Department specifically, didn't have enough deputies prior to the merge to cover all the areas they had. I can only imagine how many they'd need to do it now with the way that we've had growth in the townships.
That's right.
And that's why we find ourselves in the position we find ourselves in now with staffing, because they weren't kept.
And then they took over Beat 17 in the early.
Yeah.
Remember that was such a big deal.
Yeah.
High crime. I think, was that northeast side?
Yep, right there by Lawrence. Yeah, great conceptual idea. It's been very successful in Nashville and Charlotte and Jacksonville. I just think we rushed it a little bit maybe, and if we could have taken our time and maybe taken a couple years to implement, it may have been more successful. Really trying to predict to the future, how many cops do we actually need in projected growth to make sure that we are able to fulfill all of the functions that law enforcement is responsible for filling in a county that has urban, suburban, and rural policing. Not as much rural anymore, but all those 3 things, and they all require different things and enough staffing to do it. We're here now. IMPD is a great police department. We are this many years in, still trying to find our way, create our own identity. That's why hopefully in the next few weeks we'll be signing a contract to do a strategic plan to engage with our community and our officers to say, what is the identity of IMPD? What is the brand of IMPD? Do we need to change our mission statement? Do we need to change our logos? Because our logo still looks like the IPD logo, right? It's
with the
changed
sheriff's
multiple
star
times.
stuck in the middle.
How do we create this environment? A lot of our department wasn't associated with either agency.
That's right.
And so they don't have a history with either one of them. And that's exciting too, because they don't have remember the time in IPD or when I was on the sheriff's office, right? I wouldn't go back. Implementation, right heart. I just wish we would have taken a little bit more time.
You weren't old enough. I'm barely old enough, but I remember the Burger Chef murders. You are not old enough. Have you watched the documentary? Or we did a podcast with the producers and the writers of it. That was fabulous. I just didn't know if you had taken a look at something like that and are a fan of sort of true crime, Indiana police history stuff.
I used to be more of that. The longer I've gone in my career, the less I watch anything related to policing.
Because you can't watch it without going, oh my God,
yeah, I mean,
that's not even close.
That's not even close out, or the way that something spun or what they think could have happened as a result of it. That just drives me crazy. Like, I don't watch Cops or Live PD or any of that stuff anymore. I just can't take it.
My son did 2 tours in Afghanistan, and we sat down and watched 13 hours, and he didn't really want to watch it. And about 75% into the movie, I said, what are you thinking? And he goes, the best part about this movie is they're using the correct weapons the right way.
Yeah. That makes a difference. I think that I can't think of the name of it. There was one show, a TV cop movie not too long ago that really did a good job. Jake Gyllenhaal, I think, was in it. I can't remember the name of it. They were LAPD cops. They were partners. Watching that one, I felt like that was really good.
Do you have a favorite police movie?
Favorite police movie? All time, it's not it's technically police. Line of Fire with the
Secret Service,
yeah, Clint Eastwood. I could probably talk as they're say the words as the movie goes along. I've watched it so many times, but that's my favorite movie.
So when you
watch
Chris Spangle, isn't he just? He's the research department,
right.
heart and soul.
I like that. And then there's
he's the Chad Gray.
Chad Gray, yeah,
of the podcast.
Yeah, there you go.
You won't find Chad Gray on Google.
No.
Unless it's some sort of report. Dirty Harry or those sorts of movies that are more action-based, or you're like just going, get him?
No, I watch those and I go, oh, I can't imagine the paperwork that's going to go along with what this guy just did.
He shot 6 people in 3 days, and he's still on the street.
He's right back the next day to work. That's what I ask myself all the time now: is the paperwork on that, process on that.
I want to end, and it's necessarily before we get to the 5 questions, a somber note, but it has to be because I don't want to end the podcast. I don't want to have you in the room with us in the podcast studio without asking you about losing your colleagues. I can't imagine. I was in the Army. I never came close to combat. Nobody I really know. That's not true. Just a few people I know were in combat, post 9/11 mostly. And then, as I mentioned, my son did 2 tours in Afghanistan. My niece, Katie Elkins, did a tour in Afghanistan. They came back alive.
Mm-hmm.
Every time you strap on your seatbelt, the possibilities grow. You've lost friends, colleagues. Any special memories of the folks you've lost? And is that just something that a cop's family wife has to accept?
Yeah. Bill Toney was the first in my official career. He worked for Beech Grove, but he was my classmate. We talked a little bit before we started about
Chris Craighill
on the sheriff's office. He was also, and Natalie Beatley. They were both sheriff's officers, and they were at my ILEA training academy with me when I worked for IPS. I worked for IPS School Police for about 9 months, and I went to the academy with those guys. But Bill Toney was my classmate. So not only did I know Bill as a classmate, I spent 12 weeks with him, but he was a Marion County cop. That was number one. And then closest to me was Jake Laird in 2004, friend, beat partner, shift mate. Those are tough when you do that. And then David Moore, who had a zest and a zeal for life I've never seen in any cop. Always busy, always wanting to be better. And some of the other ones I didn't know as closely. But then I'll fast forward to Breanne Leith. I'm second in charge of the police department. When you lose somebody that
God
now
love her.
you're charged with protecting, those are tough. But every one of us knows it's a possibility. That's why when I told you at the beginning, it's a calling. You have to know, and you have to be willing, and your family has to understand and be willing that you're going to have to you could possibly have to sacrifice your life to save another. And that's what makes the work of a police officer, a firefighter, so special, is because every one of them, when they raise their right hand, knows it's a possibility, and all of us are willing to do it. Don't want to do it. Right. You have a right to go home to your family at the end of the night, and you should be able to protect yourself. However, there are going to be instances where it's you or them, and it's going to be you. Rod Bradway kicked the door in the domestic situation and saved a woman and her child and got killed as a result of that. He knew what the dangers were. He did it anyway. God bless him for doing it. God bless your family and you for your service, because whether you're in combat or not, whether you are put in a position as a police officer or not to have to make those decisions, you contribute every day to the safety and what makes this country the best country on earth, regardless of what anybody says.
For me, without in any way intruding on your memories, for me, it was Jason Baker.
Yeah.
In the early.
Yeah. I didn't mean to forget about that one. That was impactful to me. I was working that night. I was out on that perimeter. Another family.
I hate to say just a kid, but he was just a kid. He came to get his car at the sheriff's garage while I was working at. If I had given him a Pinto that had already exploded, he'd have put lights on it and said, "I don't care."
Yeah. So you think about that. He's being actively shot at with a rifle and stays in it. Doesn't pull off. Doesn't stop. Doesn't say, "Oh, he's just pull over and let somebody else deal with it." No, he stayed in it, and it cost him his life. And that really sums up sacrifice and service. If not for his actions, I don't know if these guys would have gotten caught. His death and all the good that's come since then with his dad, Jerry, and that entire family.
I was going to say his dad, I would see him at events and you just could hardly hold back the tears just looking at him. Another one from my youth is, and actually he was on my friend Jason Kimmel's paper route. He lived on Ritter in Irvington, Jack Orberg. Yeah. Going to serve warrants. And you get these names, they come to you, and it didn't seem to be a barrier or a deterrent to joining the force before the sort of enhanced chance. Mm-hmm. Do you think it is now?
We definitely see reactions from families differently, or officers involved in critical incidents than officers that survive or involved. The families react differently than I think they did in the early part of my career, and maybe we need to do a better job of preparing those families for those type of things. I don't think that's the biggest barrier, because that's always, you have to know that, right? That's a possibility. It goes back to what I said. The bigger barrier is, if I do the right thing, am I still going to be dragged through the mud? And what does that do to my family? And do I want to put my family through that? That, to me, is the biggest barrier that cops have.
I hate to mention his name, but I knew him at the sheriff's department, super guy, and I thought that he was dragged through the mud. And he's 100% in the right, in my view, as the host of the podcast and as his friend, Ron Shelnut.
Ron's a great cop, and he experienced a lot throughout his career, and he's transformed our aviation section. We now have 50-plus drones because I gave that guy a task. I said, we're moving we don't have a helicopter anymore. Right. We need to figure out how we can use drones as first responders, how we can utilize them to keep our community safe and our cops safe. Right to work creating a program that I think is second to none in the country. It's a tough job, and I can't speak for him or experiences, but we're glad that he's here and working for us still.
True or false, as chief of police for Indianapolis, it is just as important to know what not to say as to know what to say.
True.
We've reached the point in the Leaders and Legends podcast where we ask the same 5 questions of all of our guests. Chief Bailey, are you ready?
Yes.
What was your first job?
I was a bag boy at Marsh Supermarket at Rockville and Lyndhurst. My mom worked for Marsh for over 40 years till it went out of business.
Really?
Yeah. They robbed her of her pension, too. I'll never forget that. So thank you.
What was your first concert?
My very first concert was in Market Square Arena with Randy Travis. Oh, my gosh. He was the opener, but it was the guy they called sometimes he would show up, he wouldn't show up. I can't remember his name right now, but it was an old country singer, and I'll probably think of it right after we finish this thing. So that was my first.
George Jones?
George Jones. That is correct.
A little bit of an alcohol problem. That's the only reason I guessed him.
Yeah, George Jones. And then my second one was at the fairgrounds with Hank Williams Jr., who was so intoxicated that his band refused to play with him.
Number 3, if you could suggest any book for someone to read, which book would you recommend?
The book that's really sitting is A Fire in the Heartland. The
Fever in the Heartland.
Fever in the Heartland. Gosh, man, I tell you what.
That was
the one I just most recently read. And you talk about Indiana history, it's a good thing. There's lots of stuff I learned there that I did not know.
Do you want me to send you the podcast interview I did with him?
I would love for you to do that.
He was a terrific guest. It was cool for me because I grew up in Irving. I grew up on University Avenue.
I went looking for all the sites. I was driving around.
Oh, really?
Yeah, after it was done. So.
Well, I grew up on the same block as the Oberholzer house.
Yeah.
And then the Stevenson house, actually both of those houses were owned by people with whom I graduated high school.
Okay.
But it was such a big deal as a kid, but you didn't really have all the pieces put together until Egan's book, and it's off the charts.
It's so good. How quickly people can fall into this trap of an idea about something, and it's pretty scary.
I've told people when I've given talks in front of groups or whatever, charisma is the most underrated aspect of leadership.
Oh, yeah.
Because it can be the most toxic.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly right.
Number 4, if you could witness any event in history, be there in person as it happens, which event would you choose?
Whoa. I guess I should have listened to this podcast in advance so I could have prepared a little bit for...
This is like an interrogation, Chief. We don't give you the questions ahead of time.
Yeah. Anything in history, probably the Gettysburg Address.
Which is coming up, the anniversary. November 19th, 1863. Have you been to Gettysburg?
I've not been there. No. It's on my to-do list. I got to Boston finally this year, so done all that. Now
Gettysburg is off the charts.
Yeah. Bill Westfall teaches at our Leadership Academy and has for many years. He tells such great stories about that, and they take a bus group they have for the last several years out there where they had to have somebody guide them through all of those, all Little Round Top and all those things. So I've got to get out there. Haven't made it yet. I'm going to take my kids.
You should. They've really invested in it to help the visitor.
Yeah.
In a way that it makes it a lot better. I think I've been like 6 or 7 times, and the first time I went, it wasn't really that interactive. Now it's a whole nother level. Last question. If you could have dinner with anyone living today, 2 hours off the record, just to chat, whom would you choose? And since so many people have chosen Rick Snyder, head of FOP 86, you can't choose him.
That's who I was going to pick. We talk so much during the week, or he yells at me so much during the week. I'm just kidding, Rick.
So you get a 2 hour off the record chat with him all the time.
Yeah, I get a 2 hour, all the time. Wow.
He's a good man.
That is a tough. There's so many. I think I'd like to sit down and talk to George W. Bush for a while. I have so many questions.
You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Garmond Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, and the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn. As always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. McAllister. Our guest today, Chris Bailey. He's the chief of the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department. It's a long time coming to get you on the podcast. We tried many times. It was worth the wait. Thank you so much. Please be safe.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.